I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Deanne Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
Part 2 of this conversation about Charleston, but now we get to have like a deep dive fun into our Gullah Geechee tour with Godfrey.
It was an incredible day, wasn't it? That was our first full day in Charleston when we finally got you off the island and got you in the place and
to the other island.
yeah. So yeah, I booked, I was kind of the person, since I'd lived there for so long, I was kind of the one in charge of like setting our itinerary. And I had always wanted to do a Gullah Geechee tour. I had heard about them, of course, while I was there and heard about Godfrey and his tours, but I just never got myself there. So I was very excited to do this with you and to have this experience. And so I booked this tour and with Godfrey, and it was supposed to be from 1 to 2 on that was Saturday, right? Because you can get there till Friday. And
well, no, I got there Saturday morning at like midnight. So I got We took a little rest and then we got up and we said, let's get on this tour and let's have this conversation. Now, before we went on the tour, you offered me some options as to what it was that I wanted to experience on a Gullah Geechee tour. And I remember the thing that I didn't want to experience was, I guess it was about the slave auctions or...
Yeah, he had 4 different tours to choose from. 2 tours seemed like a similar tour, but one was during the day and one was at night, because Charleston has its own. There are lots of ghost tours and things in Charleston, and so I think the nighttime was similar to the day, but maybe weaving in the ghost piece of it. And then there was one that specifically talked about the auction blocks, and you were like, "Oh no, I
don't want the auction block. I don't want but the universe had something different for me."
Yeah, so I chose just the Gullah Geechee straight up, day tour. I thought it, because our nights were kind of booked and a little more challenging to find that window. So I did it during the day. And thankfully it was at 1 o'clock. So both of us got a little sleep because you got in so late and I picked you up at the airport. So we went on this tour. First of all, we were supposed to catch the tour down at the Charleston Visitor Center. We were supposed to find the bus bay is what it's called. And so it's a big covered,
beautifully constructed
brick, space,
for sure,
covered over, but wide enough for multiple buses to be able to go side by side. So it's a wide space. And we parked nearby and we're walking to the bus bay, and I started walking down the middle of the bus bay.
I'm just going to offer that, if you listen to our previous episode, Deanne had lived in South Carolina for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to offer that you were stepping into the comfortability of that being your place.
Yeah.
Because we were straight in the middle of the street with the bus depot situation, with the buses moving through the bus depot situation.
Well, there wasn't any buses moving in that moment.
That's a very moment, but they were coming.
Well, they're there. They park there, and yes, they do enter and exit, but it was wide open and nobody was moving. And I was busy looking for Godfrey's bus. So I was distracted and looking for the bus. And yes, I was in my comfortability for sure. And then you wrapped your lovely arm around me, around my shoulder, and said, "Are we supposed to be walking down the middle of the street?" And I was like, "Well, I'm just looking for Godfrey's bus." And I just keep moving. And you were like, "Well, why don't we move over to the sidewalk? Let's go over here." pulled me over to the sidewalk, ironically enough, right in front of Godfrey's bus. So he's watched this whole thing unfold, not knowing that we were his tour, not knowing that we were the ones that were headed in his direction. And you said, okay, your little white privilege is showing. Let's move over here because I'm not about to get hit by any of these buses. And so we were laughing about that when Godfrey opened his side door, and
magical.
And then we made the connection that we were actually looking for him. So it was a beautiful moment for sure.
I just want to offer some clarity. The fun of that is that as we're talking about South Carolina, and I am a visitor to this space, and Deanne is a Binya. Yeah. She's been around in South Carolina.
Well, but I'm still a Kumya. I never was Kenya because I didn't grow up there. So.
Okay, all right. So let's make the distinction. So we learn this Gullah Geechee language of Binya and Kamya. So Binya, go ahead. You can explain it.
Well, Benya is a person who is born and raised. It's a Gullah Geechee term. So as we talked about in our last episode, when you were having that conversation with your white Uber driver, he would not have used the term Benya to describe himself as a person who was born and raised in Charleston. He would refer to himself as being a native of South Carolina or a native of Charleston. So a Benya or a Kamya is definitely, those terms are used in the Gullah Geechee circles. And so the white culture doesn't normally use those terms. But so we talked about that last episode. If you didn't catch that one, you got to go back and watch it. As a person who moved there, didn't grow up there, wasn't a native of South Carolina, I would not consider myself a Benya. Even though I lived there for 22 years, I'm always going to be a Kamya. So Kamya are the people that have moved there. So there's a very big distinction, and I don't know if I wonder if that's more regional. You've lived in California and things. I wonder if that's more regional to the South. It's a really big deal to distinguish whether or not you're native or you were born and raised there or not. And I wonder if that's a regional thing.
Well, I mean, it definitely is a regional thing. And I think it is something that's particular to the South because, again, it's the cultural status quo about how you exist in the South and how the South knows that people want to be. So if you're new, you're not going to understand Southern culture in the way that you should. If you're a Kenya, then you have to learn from Binya.
Yes.
To understand just how the status quo works. And that was the thing that was like so fantastic about being able to do this tour, because our tour guide, Godfrey, was explaining that the tour is done differently depending on who you're going with the tour. And there's 5 scripts.
Yes.
Telling the narrative storytelling.
Right.
And one of the scripts that Godfrey goes is against the grain of the story, the delusion that the nation, I'm not even going to just describe that to South Carolina, that the nation wants to be us in romanticizing antebellum South.
Yes.
In the midst of all of the violence and the harm that is ingrained in everything that we saw. So as a person who is a visitor, and I love this language because, also being on the island, you can see how interwoven first culture is. So like culture from the continent of Africa, even in the languaging that the Gullah Geechee use, the languaging is so much like a lot of the languages that are on the continent of Africa, that are like in the Caribbean with the patois. There's so much connectivity in that. And so even though culture has been spread apart in the ways that it has, through the language, you get to hold so much of the cultural context. And I really appreciated that about the Gullah Geechee tour in particular. But let's start just with besides getting ourselves out of our privilege of walking down the street and creating safety, we get onto this wonderful tour bus, and it starts with, let us talk about these 5 scripts. And we are going to have this tour telling the truth about what South Carolina's heritage looks like.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I want to share a picture of Godfrey, of our tour guide, Godfrey. And so I want everybody to know, and I actually have I want to make sure that people know his website so that you can book. If you go to Charleston, I'm just going to give a little plug. If you go to Charleston, you need to take a Gullah Geechee tour, and there are several to choose from. And Godfrey, I could tell, and I think maybe you identified as well, that there's a little tension between even the Gullah Geechee tours about who's leading into those 5 scripts and who is actually telling a foundational truth about the Gullah Geechee experience in Charleston. So I haven't taken the other tours, so I can't really speak to them, but I sensed the tension. I don't know if you did. And I really appreciated Godfrey's honesty and he was very thorough. He knows a lot. He's written books. So definitely go to his website. I've got for those that are listening, I've got the website on the screen right now, but I'm definitely going to put it in the show notes so that you can find him and book a tour if you go to Charleston. So wanted to say that. Hi, Godfrey.
Godfrey is a love space. He definitely is holding down a very strong understanding of like the heritage of South Carolina and the elements of the Gullah Geechee culture interwoven into literally the fabric of the land. And that is what I really appreciated being able to be made aware of, starting with the gates. Talk about the gates to the heart of the nation. And I wish we had a picture slideshow that we can share with people, but hopefully folks
I could create that. Yeah, we could create that and put it on our website, put it on our LinkedIn so that people can, or maybe upload it to YouTube. I mean, we've got options. So as we'd like to put resources that we talk about that we think people might want to revisit and do a deeper dive into, we put things on
those resources. But let's talk about it though. We'll get to the resources because I really want to talk. Tell me these things, because we started out with looking at the what they call the market, and the market had the auction blocks in there, so you could see the history of where people were being bought and sold in the market. I also was really taken aback by the fact that there are still auction blocks by a majority of the houses. I learned that a majority of the churches, our good faith-based people in the South were the ones that trafficked the most bodies into slavery and sold them off into slavery. And you could see the remnants of that still existing today. That the symbolism is so deeply etched and ingrained in every cobblestone on the ground, from the cobblestones from the slave ships, and you can go into more details. I'm just going to kind of like highlight in this moment all of the things that stuck out to me. Interwoven into the iron, you had a lot of the person who was the most well-known iron maker,
Philip Simmons.
Philip Simmons, a Black man. Yes. Who did like the most amazing storytelling in the irons. He used Ndinkra symbols, but the Ndinkra symbols, as they were explained on our Gullah Geechee tour, had a lot of like dual meanings as to what was going on, on the lands in South Carolina, on the plantations, and directing people to things as I was learning. What else? Oh my goodness, those trees are so beautifully painful. That's the only way that I can say it. So strange fruits and having it described in that way, because you have resurrection firm, my voice is starting to get a little shaky as I talk about this. You can see the blood and the roots of the trees, these beautiful oaks that are swaying in the wind,
with the Spanish moss draped on them, very typical visuals of South Carolina and the Low Country
of Southern antebellum. What else was going into communities and seeing these big, beautiful houses like you saw in Gone with the Wind. It's just that there's more now on cobblestone streets, and you can see at the bottom of the homes that there's like breathe holes, because that's where slave people were kept in the homes. And the homes are very closed off. So I was joking as I was talking about and describing this to my young people that like we really don't know what's going on in the holes, and so joking in Black culture in a unsafe way is just like Black folks are still kept in basements in certain places. I laugh about that, but it's not funny because there is this kind of like underlying concern that there's a possibility that still could be happening in this current day and age. What else? That there was no, during the daytime, downtown South Carolina, other than Black folks in the market selling their wares and their artistry, I didn't see any Black folk walking around in the stores with shopping bags, and not at all. Mm-hmm. I felt like I was the visitor for the day, besides our tour guide. So some people in the tour guides and folks that are selling their wares in the market. But other than that, just walking around town, didn't really just see Black folks downtown. So I thought that was a little creepy and a little bit weird. And what else that I learned in this tour? There's just so much to deep dive. The Citadel we went by, and the Citadel is like one of the oldest, if it's not the oldest, training ground for enforcement, where when there was emancipation or before even emancipation. Was it before emancipation?
No, it was after emancipation during Reconstruction. It was a way of, the Citadel was created to create a police force that needed, the white people felt like they needed a police force to keep the newly emancipated, formerly enslaved folks in line. So that was the impetus behind. We had slave catchers before emancipation.
Right.
They performed that duty, but then after emancipation, they felt like, the white people felt like there needed to be an organized system that would keep the newly emancipated folks in line. So
kind of like ICE today.
Yeah.
Random people
all around us. That's why you can't reform the police department, because it's inherently
ingrained.
It's racism is its foundation. So there is no way to reform it. I'm not saying that we don't need some level of law enforcement, but it's not, it doesn't, the current iteration of it is bred out of racism.
Yes. And the Citadel was an example of that. And then going into a park that, from an aerial view is a Confederate flag, but seeing the most amazingly beautiful magnolias growing off of the trees. So like, there was moments for me where I'm just like, I have major pain and horror that this stuff is not shifted. But then like there's this internal conversation that you're having with yourself where it's like, it's important for this history to remain, to tell these stories, but it's how the stories are being told to make sure that we never repeat the same amount of harm that is evident in the land there, that is evident in the way that they've kept the structures and the history, but have told a very romanticized version of the pain and the harm, which doesn't allow for us to be thinking about how it is that we can exist differently. And that's because the truth of the matter is, I don't know how many people want to exist differently. There's something comfortable about it.
Yeah, the rattling of the cage, if you will, the rattling of the table that happens when you do speak into the actual truth. And I told you didn't get a chance to meet because you got to Charleston later than anticipated. But my friend Paul, who was an interpreter at McLeod Plantation, which is one of the few, if not the only plantation in the area that tells the true story, only tells the story of the enslaved. They don't focus on the story of the owners. They call it a forced labor camp when they give their tours, and are always interested to see the looks on the faces of the white people in the tour group, because that's what it is. It's a forced labor camp. And so, it still says plantation on the sign, but they don't hold back the details of what it actually was. And it really rattles some chains, but like you said, well, that's not the term I want to use. Rattles the table, shakes the table.
We want to rattle chains.
Yeah, I want to use the chains. But I always appreciated the fact that they are intentional about, because like you said, there have been white people that have pushed back. Paul's told me many stories about white people that push back. I mean, it went viral one time with him, with a person who left a review of it after being on his tour. And they said, I didn't come to Charleston. I didn't come to McLeod to learn about slavery. I came to McLeod to learn about the beauty of South Carolina. And it went viral because it was like, what the fuck are you talking about? But that's a perfect example of the blinders that we as white people exist in and crave. We still want that lost cause narrative. We still want the Gone with the Wind, antebellum curated story, because it makes us feel good. And if we learn the real truth, it just makes us feel icky. And it's all connected to all of the push to get rid of DEI. And when you push someone who was saying, why would you get rid of talking about the balanced truth? They want to say, well, it just makes white kids uncomfortable. It just makes white kids feel guilty. And so we're not going to do that. And that is, in a nutshell, why Charleston still operates the way it operates, because we don't want to make white people feel guilty.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Even in you saying that it makes white children uncomfortable, white children feel guilty, it still centers whiteness, because throughout time and history, any non-white child who is hearing about this type of history places you in an understanding that you are lesser and treated lesser than a white child or a white human or a white person, which is very clear, very present in South Carolina. But there are, what I do appreciate is that there, like the Gullah Geechee tour, there are those who are speaking into the truth and telling stories, to the point of 36 souls who were found buried under one of a beautiful building that does civic engagement and art work. You can tell us a little bit.
It's the Gilliard Auditorium, and it's a structure that houses. They do concerts there and music and plays, and it's just a big auditorium, kind of cultural arts center. And back when I was still living in Charleston, they tore down the existing structure because it had been there a long time and it was falling apart. They tore it down with the intention of building a refreshed version of the Gilliard Auditorium. And in the process of excavating for the new building, they found the remains of 36 humans that had been buried there on that land, and obviously had been there before the first Gilliard was built, but either they must not have found them or didn't. I don't know. I don't know what the story was, because that was a long time ago. So yeah, they found these 36 souls buried in that space, and there was 2.5 years of work done trying to identify who they are, identify the story behind them being there. I think it was proven or understood that it was formerly enslaved humans that were buried there, and it ranged in ages. It was older people to middle age to children to babies. And I've talked on episodes before about being at the dedication, the reinterment of these 36 souls. And we walked along George Street, which from the College of Charleston, which is just a few blocks away. We walked behind the horse-drawn cortege with some of the remains in there, with drums and all kinds of singing and celebration happening as we walked behind the cortege, and got back to the space, and they were reinterred. And then we spoke. They had been assigned names. There had been research done about where these humans might have come from, especially those that they could tell had been born on the continent and brought over on the ships. And some of those had been born on the U.S. soil, but they reassigned names to them based on what would be culturally, what might be appropriate for the time and age that they were alive. And we spoke those names into the air as they were reinterred. And so just a week before we were in Charleston, they had dedicated a fountain in the space And the fountain's beautiful. It's a circular structure that is a pool of water, and on the outer edge, they, as I understand it, they contracted and found and invited Black folks from the Charleston area whose ages might be close to what they thought the ages of the 36 were, and they casted their hands. So all along the outer edge of the fountain is these beautiful hand sculptures, and they're in all different formations. Some are clasped like this, some are just wrapped like this, some are open, and you can tell from the size, which are children, which are, you can tell from the knuckles. I saw a pair of hands that looked very much reminded me of my mother's hands because she had arthritis and larger knuckles, and some you can tell that might be male hands because they're bigger, and some are smaller. So it's a super powerful space. And we drove by it on the tour, and I had told you the story, and then we circled back to go spend some time there. So
yeah, and to
tell
honor
me
this.
about your experience there.
Yeah, no, I as we drove through on the tour, I know that I wanted to circle back because what I envisioned it as kind of a bowl. How like going into some type of faith-based place, and then there's the bowl of like the holy water. So the way that I was thinking about the way that they made this structure was a bowl of holy water that had these 36 bowls of hands to honor the lives that were lost, but then also to call in the holiness of South Carolina as the holy city, where there's so many different types of faith-based iteration churches and on every block and every corner. And the way that the hands were placed felt like it was calling in honor in that way. And so it was really special that we got the opportunity to recite a poem that was created first by Deanne, talking about the experience of participating in the reinterment of the bodies through the ceremony that were placed there. And then after hearing this poem, she shared it with me. I have a younger daughter who was doing some work on an English class and needed to do a period narrative analysis. And so what she did was to create a response to the poem that you had created, honoring and speaking to the spirit of one of the lost souls. So we have that reading for you.
Godfrey was kind enough to record us reciting, and we decided to do it stanza by stanza. So I will read the first stanza of my poem, and then you will read the first stanza of your young person's poem, and it was something else. So we're gonna play that video here because we want you all to hear it and to experience it, and then we'll talk about it on the backside. So, so here we go.
Thank you for listening.
Freedom in eternal rest.
Eternal rest and freedom.
He owned you like his prized cow. He paid money for you while you paid in blood, sweat, and tears.
He cannot own we who birthed humanity. There is no price for human life, no amount of blood, sweat, or tears.
He didn't care when you died, except about how his day would be changed because you cooked his breakfast or looked up at him while on your knees.
There was no care when I lived, no exception, no change, no face, easily replaced to cook his breakfast and look up at him while on bended knee.
His breath has been long quiet, but his strands live on in me.
My breath has been long quiet, and my strands live on in you.
Today, I walked behind your hearse, while voices sang in mother tongues, and drums beat rhythms that reminded me of heartbeats.
Today I walked beside you, chanting in mother tongue, and drums beat rhythms that reminded me no heartbeat.
I stood in prayer as your name was sung with the graceful power it was always meant to feel, and there was joy.
Stopped A foreign name was sung with a graceful power. It was always meant to be, and there was freedom.
Joy for the knowing that you have finally felt the peace he stole from you.
Freedom in knowing that I could escape to peace in death.
Joy for the wind in the trees that will sway, forever casting shade to protect you from the sun.
Freedom from the winds in the trees where too many black bodies swayed, forever casting shade that robbed us of our sun.
Joy as the strands in me that once owned you bow in reverence to the beauty you were never allowed to know.
Freedom from the strands that still live on in you. I rise in glory in all the beauty that I have always known.
You are free to be loved for the perfect soul you are. You are free to know your name once again, given by your mother and father before my ancestors stole it away.
Like the enduring love I felt from perfect souls came, my name from godly spells, whispered from heavens to mother and father by my ancestors.
Soar to the tops of the clouds, dear one, and bask in the light that will dim for you no more.
I join them at the top of the clouds, exalted ones, to bask in our light that always shines bright the path to rest eternally free. That's great.
That felt so good. And even watching it again, it feels good because it feels healing. It feels healing. It feels like we could call in the harm and the pain, but then like relish in like the beauty of telling the story, expressing the feeling, and healing from it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's why it's so important that we tell these stories. That's why the erasure of even if discomfort is one of the feelings that is felt by anybody that looks like me from these stories, Godfrey talked a lot about the 5 scripts that are used to erase effectively the realities of what this country has borne. I hope in reading those poems together and being in that space together that we can show that it doesn't have to be full of crippling discomfort, that it's only because people that look like me are so indoctrinated into believing that no harm ever happened that the initial discomfort is hard. I will grant you, when I first woke up, man, there were times where something would happen, I'd get called in or whatever, and I would shut down for a whole week. I'm not making light of the feelings that happen when you're first awakening to this stuff and you're trying to work through it. But the more you do it, the less it becomes disabling and dismantling and disabilitating to yourself. You don't have to sit in that really, really, really tough space for as long as you do in the beginning. And then you can get to the point where you can have a moment like this, where we are claiming, owning, and honoring all in the same moment. And it becomes a space of healing and joy for all that are involved. I'll speak for myself, but I think that's what you were experiencing or have expressed that you experienced. And not sit in the harm. That's the healing part, right? That's where you
it's getting through the harm. I mean, so like
right.
sitting in it,
it's
it's feeling it, acknowledging it,
mm-hmm.
and going through a process to heal it. And that's like the getting through. The journey is continuous.
Yes.
And I think that that's what you're speaking to. The journey is continuous, but it is the intentional effort. It is taking time and space. Mm-hmm. It's breathing through things. It is putting some type of creative interpretation to the truth that allows you to figure out how to integrate it into your life and then move through it to the other side. And that was a big part of South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
and you have to engage people. And I say that in particular, I mean, this is a perfect place for us to kind of like calm down our conversation, but I also remember engaging young people as we were there, because we had this moment, we had this bit of healing, and then I'm also recognizing like the social cultural construct of like what's happening in South Carolina. So these two, a boy and a girl, a white boy and a girl walked by. And I said to them, "Oh, excuse me, hello." And they both like kind of stopped. The boy kind of like, shouldered himself up a little bit, and the girl was just like, "Yes." And I was like, "Well, do you know what this fountain is or whatever?" Because as we're walking by all of this symbolism of the violence and the pain, I'm curious as to how people are engaging this knowledge that is in their faces. And so these two young white people, I asked them, and the boy was like, no, and the girl was like, no. But then the young lady, she said, "Well, I would like to know." And I was like, "Well, then you should try to find out about it." And they walked away, and you could even tell that interaction was unfamiliar to them for being a Black woman who called out to them in a gentle way, because everybody was so gentle with me in South Carolina, called out to them in a gentle way and just engaged them with a question of curiosity about whether or not they know, and then invited them to find out. Then there was another group of white identified boy and girl walking past. And I engaged them. Do you know this as well? The difference with these young people, one, the person worked at the facility, the Gilead, but they stopped. They said, "We don't know." And then they said, "But we would like to know." But then they came in to actually continue and have a conversation with me about what the fountain was, about what the hands represented. And it just was an opportunity to model how, when we do engage each other outside in a welcoming way, in a prickly, sweet pineapple kind of way, which I also learned in South Carolina, is representative of this welcome. And it makes sense to use the pineapple, now that I said that, because the pineapple has these thorns on the outside, but then you have to cut off the thorns to get to the sweet, succulent juice. And South Carolina is that. Cutting off all of those prickly thorns to get to the juice. And the juice is the history of our nation, to your point, that we can tell and we can say that we had this violence, harm, and kind of evil capitalistic economy that was very violent to Black bodies, Black people. And we can tell that story and talk about how we imagine and envision that we can exist without, or to heal through and past that harm, not without it, but to heal through and past that harm so that we can get to a different side.
Yeah. And the fact you mentioned it, the fact that the second couple that stopped and came into because there's a fence around everything in Charleston. So there's a fence around this space, and open, with the gate was open, and they actually walked into the space with us to engage further. But he said he worked in the Gilliard. He works in that building in I don't know, booking or something like that. He's not, but he fully admitted that even though he works in that building, he knew nothing about that fountain and what it meant. And so that is, in a nutshell, that's exactly the wile and the ways and the hoodoo of Charleston, and how it just weaves this narrative that the history is all right there. It's all right under your nose, and we don't see it. So
it's how we tell the stories, taking our blinders off, and then being engaged and communicative with each other, so that we can get through, and have the type of communities that we want to exist in.
Yeah, because it's not going to get better if we don't. It's never going to shift. It's never going to shift if we don't try to crack that shell. We talked about that in a previous episode, that there's a shell that exists around the narratives in Charleston, and you got to crack the shell to make an omelet. You gotta get. I mean, birth doesn't happen if the egg comes to fruition and the new life comes out. It's got to crack the shell to get out. So I'm just going to encourage everybody to keep cracking the shells.
Cracking the shells, cutting off the thorns.
Heads,
having conversations and making, friendships, building friendships, because Deanne and I have had the opportunity now to be in space with each other, like to share a home together, to break bread together, which takes us to a different understanding of how we can communicate and like really talk about the things that are impacting us and kind of unpack how we come to those things and get different perspectives. So we'll talk about that as we move deeper into these conversations.
Lots more to talk about. Thank you, my friend.
All right. See you soon.
Okay.
Why do I give a fuck?
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Deanne. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.